My name is Evan Maddox, I'm 35 years old, and I live in Austin, Texas, where I run a small furniture restoration studio on the east side of town. It smells like cedar oil, sawdust, and old stories, the kind of place where people bring broken things hoping they can be made whole again. Until 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was the eldest son of Charles Maddox, one of the wealthiest real estate developers in Texas, a man who could turn empty land into gold and expected his children to carry his same fire. But instead of chasing skyscrapers or investors, I chose to chase grain patterns and color tones. While my brother, Derek, closed million-dollar deals in glass towers, I spent my days sanding down century-old desks. That difference, my difference, was something my father tolerated in silence for years. Until the night he didn't. It was his 70th birthday, the kind of event people in Austin's elite circles wait for months to attend. The Maddox estate sprawled across 10 acres just outside Lake Travis, where the glass ballroom glowed with gold light, champagne towers, and the hum of power. There were senators, developers, and oil executives, people who built kingdoms from concrete and contracts. And then there was me, the son who worked with his hands. I'd brought a gift that night. A restored oak desk that had once belonged to my grandfather. I'd spent 3 months repairing its broken legs, replacing its cracked inlay, and polishing it until the light danced off its surface. I thought maybe, for once, my father would see the value in what I did, in who I was. He saw something else instead. When he called me over to join him in the center of the room, his voice carried the weight of command. "Evan," he said, his Texas drawl smooth and cutting, "come tell everyone about your little workshop." The laughter started even before I reached him. Phones were out, faces glowing in the ballroom light, because when Charles Maddox spoke, people listened. I smiled tightly, trying to keep my voice even. "Actually, Dad, I brought something I think you'll appreciate. It's in your study." He cut me off with a sharp laugh. "A gift? Son, what could you possibly give me that I don't already own?" He took a sip of his scotch. "Maybe another chair you sanded down in that hobby shop of yours?" The laughter around us deepened. I saw my mother, Elaine, standing near the fireplace in her emerald dress, every inch of her perfectly curated. Her expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker in her eyes. Embarrassment? Guilt? I couldn't tell. "Dad, please." But before I could finish, his open palm cracked across my face. The sound was sharp, louder than the music, louder than the laughter that followed. The room froze. My cheek stung, my ears rang, and my father's cold blue eyes locked onto mine. "You're a disgrace to the Maddox name," he said. "From this day on, you're out. No inheritance, no trust fund, no part of the $180 million estate. You wanted to be your own man? Congratulations. You're on your own." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is he serious?" But most people didn't look away, they recorded it. My cousin even whispered, "This is going viral." By morning, it did. The clip of my father slapping me became the most watched video in Austin that week. Headlines read, "Billionaire disinherits son at his own birthday party." I drove home that night with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed to my cheek. The slap didn't just sting, it burned through 35 years of trying to earn approval from a man who only loved control. My small studio above my workshop felt colder than usual when I walked in. The old oak desk, the one I'd made for him, still sat in the truck bed outside, wrapped in blankets like a body waiting to be buried. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't angry because of the money. I was angry because I had spent my entire existence trying to matter to a man who had never really seen me. I stayed up that night sanding a half-finished rocking chair, the kind that creaks softly when you lean too far back. I ran my fingers over the wood grain, breathing through the ache in my chest. That's when I made a decision, one that would unknowingly set off everything that came next. I picked up my notepad and began to plan. A new shop, maybe in Santa Fe or Nashville, anywhere far enough away from the shadow of Charles Maddox. No more pretending. No more begging to belong. If he wanted to erase me from his will, so be it. I would build something real, even if I had to start from sawdust. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Adeline Carter, one of my oldest clients, an older woman who'd been more like family than anyone at that party. When I answered, her voice was quiet but urgent. "Evan, honey? I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. But there's something you need to hear. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Her words carried weight, the kind that only comes when truth has been waiting for decades. "Please," she said softly, "be home in the morning. There's something I need to give you." At 9 a.m. sharp, a knock came at my apartment door. I stared at the 3 strangers standing in my doorway that morning, their calm professionalism somehow more unnerving than the chaos of the night before. The woman in front, Judith Blackwell, was tall, mid-50s, wearing a charcoal suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. Her expression wasn't cold, but it carried the kind of gravity reserved for surgeons and judges. The two men flanking her stood silently, one older, with kind eyes behind thin wire glasses, and a younger associate gripping a leather briefcase like it contained secrets too heavy for paper. "Mr. Maddox," Judith said again, her tone even, "my name is Judith Blackwell. I'm a senior partner at Blackwell, Reeves & Cole in Dallas. These are my colleagues, Arthur Reeves and Caleb Cole. We represent your biological father, Mr. Victor Hale." Her words didn't make sense. "My what? My biological father?" I repeated, laughing nervously. "You've got the wrong guy. My father's name is Charles Maddox, trust me, he's been reminding me of that my entire life." Judith's gaze softened, but her voice stayed steady. "Mr. Maddox, or rather, Mr. Hale, your biological father has been searching for his kidnapped son for 35 years. We believe that son is you." I blinked, waiting for someone to jump out with a camera yelling a gotcha. But no one did. Before I could form another word, the younger man, Caleb, clicked open the briefcase and set it on my coffee table. He pulled out a large manila folder, opening it like a priest unveiling scripture. Inside were photos, reports, and what looked like police documents yellowed with age. Judith gestured toward the file. "May we come in? This isn't a conversation to have in a hallway." My hands were still shaking as I stepped aside and let them in. They moved through my apartment like they'd done this 1,000 times, calm, respectful, efficient. Arthur stood near the window, Caleb laid out documents across the table, and Judith sat directly across from me, her posture perfect, her eyes kind but unflinching. 35 years ago, Judith began, an infant named Noah Victor Hale was taken from a park in Portland, Oregon. His parents, Victor and Eleanor Hale, were prominent entrepreneurs in aerospace technology. The case gained national attention at the time. Despite years of searches, there were no leads. Caleb slid a photograph across the table. This was taken 6 weeks before the kidnapping. The picture showed a young couple standing in a park, the man tall and dark-haired, holding a baby in his arms while the woman laughed beside him. My throat tightened. Because that baby, that small, chubby-cheeked boy, had a tiny silver bracelet around his wrist, engraved with a small steam train. Judith watched my face carefully. "Do you recognize it?" I swallowed hard and looked down at my own wrist. The bracelet was still there. I'd worn it every day since I could remember. My father, Charles, told me it was a Maddox heirloom passed down from his father. The room seemed to tilt. "That's impossible," I said weakly. No, my parents." Caleb opened another folder and handed me a document stamped with the faded seal of the Portland Police Department. "This is the original report. June 15, 1990. Infant male, 6 months old, kidnapped from Laurelhurst Park while his nanny was distracted by a woman asking for directions." Arthur's voice was soft but steady. "That nanny, Maria Santos, gave a description of the woman she spoke to. Decades later, when facial recognition software compared her account to aged photographs, it matched almost perfectly with Elaine Maddox." The room fell silent. My mind spun backward, to the way my mother never liked talking about my birth, to how she changed the subject when people asked about family history, to the way my father always called me fortunate rather than blessed. Judith continued gently. "Maria Santos passed away 15 years ago, but before she did, she left a written confession with her priest. She admitted that she had been paid $50,000 to look away for 5 minutes. She thought she was helping a childless couple adopt discreetly. She didn't know it was a kidnapping until she saw the news report, and by then, she was too afraid to come forward." Caleb then placed a newer document on the table, an ancestry DNA report. My name was at the top, highlighted. 3 months ago, a DNA database matched your genetic markers to Victor Hale's family line with 99.8% accuracy. It confirmed what he has believed for decades, that you are his missing son. I couldn't breathe. Wait, I stammered. "You're saying my parents, Charles and Elaine, stole me?" Judith nodded once. "Yes. After multiple miscarriages, Elaine became desperate. Through her social network, she found a woman involved in an illegal adoption ring. We believe she convinced your father to go along with it, to fabricate records, forge documents, and start a new life. The Maddoxes filed false birth certificates in Texas. We've traced the payments, the paper trail, even the fake agency they used." I stood, my pulse hammering in my ears. "No. That can't." Judith cut in softly. "Evan, this is your birth photo." She slid the final piece of paper across the table, a hospital picture, dated the day I was born. And there I was, wrapped in a blue blanket, the same train bracelet around my tiny wrist. It was me. The room blurred. I sank back onto the couch, my legs giving out. I stared at the documents, the photos, the truth staring back at me like a stranger's reflection. Judith's voice was calm. Your biological father, Victor Hale, is alive. He's been searching for you since the day you were taken. He's built an empire of his own, Hale Aerospace, valued at over $3 billion. But through it all, he never removed your name from his will. You've been listed as sole heir since 1990. I felt the air leave my lungs. Caleb said quietly, he wanted us to tell you he's ready to meet you whenever you are. For a long time, I didn't answer. I just looked down at that silver bracelet, the one that suddenly felt heavier than ever. My entire life, every photo, every Christmas, every argument, was a lie built on a crime. And the people I called Mom and Dad were the ones who committed it. That afternoon, I sat in silence long after the lawyers had left. The documents lay spread across my table like an autopsy of my entire existence. My childhood, my family, my name, all dissected and labeled under the heading Evidence. I ran my hand over the police report, over the faded ink that spelled out a date, June 15, 1990, and it hit me like thunder. That was the day my life began, and the day someone else's life ended in heartbreak. For 35 years, I'd lived inside a story someone else wrote for me. The hours passed in a blur. Every creak in the floorboard, every hum of the AC, felt too loud. Around 5 p.m., my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Evan, this is Victor Hale. I understand this must be overwhelming. I'll be in Austin tomorrow morning if you're willing to meet me. No pressure. Just a cup of coffee. The message felt surreal, like reading a sentence from a book that suddenly decided to address me. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Yes. 10 a.m., Harrison Cafe, East Austin. The next morning, I woke before dawn. My reflection in the mirror looked foreign, eyes swollen, jaw tight, the faint mark of my father's slap still visible. Or maybe it was just my mind filling in the bruise. I almost didn't go. Part of me still clung to denial, whispering, maybe it's a scam. Maybe they're wrong. But deep down, I knew. The bracelet on my wrist, the missing photos from before age 2, the uneasy silences from my mother, all of it fit too perfectly. When I walked into Harrison Cafe, the morning light flooded through tall windows, painting gold streaks across the floor. I spotted him instantly. He was sitting at the corner table, tall, silver-haired, wearing a navy suit with no tie. Victor Hale looked like someone who belonged to both boardrooms and quiet mornings. But what stopped me was his face, the shape of his jaw, the eyes, the faint arch of his brow. They were mine. He stood when I approached. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice trembling with restraint, he said, "You still wear it." I looked down. The bracelet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another one, identical, except it was bigger and worn from age. "I've worn this every day since you disappeared," he said softly. "They gave us these the day you were born. A matching set. I never took mine off." The air between us thickened. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "Just, let me look at you." He smiled through the tears building in his eyes, his hand trembling slightly. "You look exactly like her." "Her? Eleanor?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Your mother. She died 5 years ago. Cancer." His voice cracked on the last word. "She never stopped believing you were alive. She kept your nursery the same for 30 years, the blue walls, the toy trains, the rocking horse. I couldn't bring myself to change it." I swallowed hard, feeling a pain I didn't have words for. I'd lost one mother, but the one who loved me had been gone my entire life. Victor continued, his voice slow and steady, like someone piecing together a broken story. "We hired investigators for decades. I sold stock, mortgaged everything, searching for even a trace. But the adoption ring was deep, they changed names, records, everything. When your DNA match appeared on that genealogy site, I thought it was a cruel glitch." He paused, meeting my eyes. "Until I saw your photo. Your mother's eyes. My smile. I couldn't stop the tears. They came without warning, like 35 years of confusion melting into something I didn't recognize, grief, gratitude, and rage all at once. We talked for hours. About the day I was taken. About the woman who distracted the nanny. About how Elaine and Charles had faked a private adoption to cover their crime. But when Victor mentioned forgiveness, I flinched. "They raised you," he said quietly. "I can't imagine the confusion you must feel. But I don't want revenge, Evan. I just want to know you." I looked at him, stunned. "You're not angry?" His gaze softened. "I've spent 35 years being angry. It didn't bring you home any faster. I've learned that sometimes, the only thing we can rebuild is what's still left." Those words stayed with me. By the time we left the cafe, the morning had turned warm. Victor walked me to my truck, then stopped, almost hesitant. Would you like to come to Portland? Just for a few days. See the house. See where you came from? I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. I think I need to. 2 days later, I stepped off the plane into cool Oregon air. Victor's driver took me straight to his home, a large, sunlit house on the outskirts of Portland, surrounded by towering trees. The moment I walked in, the smell of cedar and fresh paint hit me. On the living room wall hung a large framed photo, a woman with soft brown hair and kind eyes, holding a baby. Me. My throat tightened as I stepped closer. That's her? Victor nodded, his eyes glistening. That's the last picture we took before you were taken. I stood there for a long time, unable to move. It felt like looking into another timeline, one where the kidnapping never happened, where my parents hadn't lied, where I'd grown up in this very room instead of a stranger's house. Behind me, Victor's voice trembled. You were 6 months old, Evan. You'd just learned to sit up. Eleanor used to say you smiled like you understood the whole world already. I smiled weakly. Guess I unlearned it somewhere along the way. He laughed softly, then his voice broke again. She would have loved to see you now. I turned and hugged him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence said everything words couldn't. I'm sorry. I missed you. I'm here now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of the guest room, staring at the city lights in the distance. It was strange, how I could feel so complete and so broken at the same time. In 1 week, I'd lost a father, gained another, and discovered that my life was built on someone else's theft. But the worst was yet to come. Because as I sat there, scrolling through my phone, a headline flashed across the screen. Billionaire couple Charles and Elaine Maddox under federal investigation. And beneath it, their mugshots. The next morning, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in years, silence that felt heavy, not peaceful. The world outside was calm, but inside me, it was chaos. The headlines had already spread like wildfire. Texas billionaires Charles and Elaine Maddox arrested in connection with 1990 kidnapping. Photos of their arrest at the Barton Creek Country Club were everywhere, the same place they'd hosted charity galas and power luncheons for decades. And now, the same crowd that once toasted their name stood frozen as police handcuffed them beside the 18th hole. Charles looked furious, his face red and swollen with disbelief. Elaine looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, fragile, almost ghost-like. The irony was cruel and perfect. The same audience who'd watched my father slap me months earlier was now watching him fall apart in front of cameras. I turned off the TV. My stomach churned. Even after everything, part of me didn't want to see them like that. But another part, the one that had lived under the weight of their lies, felt something that almost scared me. Relief. 2 days later, the FBI called. They needed my statement in Austin. I flew back with Victor at my side, the man who'd lost me, now walking beside me through the wreckage of the people who'd stolen me. At the field office, the agents laid it all out, the evidence, the forged adoption papers, the payments to corrupt clerks, the fake birth certificate. Each piece felt like another nail in the coffin of the life I once believed was real. Elaine had confessed everything within hours of her arrest. She told them about the miscarriages, about her desperation, about how she found a woman who promised her a private adoption from Mexico that didn't exist. She told them she'd convinced Charles to go along with it, promising no one would ever know. Charles, of course, denied it all. He claimed ignorance. Claimed Elaine had acted alone. Claimed he was a victim, too. But the paper trail told a different story, one he couldn't talk his way out of. When the agents finally let me go, Victor and I stepped outside into the late Texas sun. He looked at me quietly. You don't have to see them, he said. You've done enough. But I shook my head. No. I need to. And I did. Not for closure, that word felt too clean for what I carried, but because there were things that needed to be said out loud. The holding facility in downtown Austin was cold and sterile, like it had forgotten what warmth meant. They led me down a hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and despair. When I walked into the visitation room, Charles was already sitting there, hands cuffed, jaw clenched. He looked older, smaller somehow. The power that had always clung to him like a shadow was gone. He didn't look up until I sat down across from him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then, in a low voice, he said, "So, you've come to see the monster." I met his eyes. "No," I said softly. "I came to see the man who taught me how to hide pain behind pride." His expression flickered, just for a moment. Then the anger returned. "You think you're better than me now? Because of that man, your real father." I leaned forward. "No. I'm not better. But I'm free." His hands tightened around the table's edge. "Everything I did for her," he said, his voice sharp. "Elaine was breaking, Evan. You don't know what that's like, watching someone you love fall apart. You're right, I said. I don't. But I do know what it's like to grow up in a house built on lies. To never understand why you didn't fit. To be punished for being something you could never be. His jaw tightened. We gave you a good life. I nodded slowly. You gave me a life. But not a truth. The silence that followed felt endless. For the first time in my life, Charles Maddox had no words. When the guard announced our time was up, I stood. I don't hate you, I said quietly. I just don't owe you my pain anymore. He didn't answer. He just stared at me with something between regret and pride, like even now, he couldn't decide which emotion cost less. They allowed me to see Elaine afterward. She was sitting alone, her hair unkempt, hands trembling. The woman who once floated through galas in emerald gowns now looked like someone carrying 35 years of ghosts. When she saw me, she started crying. Evan, she whispered. Or Jacob. I don't even know what to call you anymore. Evan is fine, I said softly. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice cracking. I wanted a baby so badly. After the miscarriages, I thought God was punishing me. When she offered me that chance, I told myself it was fate. I nodded, my throat tight. But it wasn't fate. It was theft. She covered her face. I know. I knew every time you smiled. Every time I looked at you and saw a face that didn't belong to me. Tears blurred my vision. For all her guilt, for all her wrong, she had loved me, in her own broken, selfish way. And somehow, knowing that made it hurt even more. I forgive you, I whispered finally. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. The trials moved fast. Elaine cooperated fully and received a reduced sentence. Charles fought until the end, his empire collapsing around him as investors fled and properties went into receivership. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I wasn't in the courtroom. I didn't need to be. I was back in Portland, sanding the edge of a chair in my new workshop, the one Victor helped me open. As I ran my hand over the smooth wood, I realized something. For 35 years, I'd been restoring furniture, giving broken things a second life. Now, I was finally doing the same for myself. That night, Victor came by the shop, holding 2 coffees and a quiet smile. They sentenced him today, he said simply. 15 years. I nodded. Yeah. I read. He hesitated, then added softly, you know? I don't think you inherited your father's. You built yourself. I smiled faintly. Guess I did. We stood there in the silence of the workshop, 2 men, both victims of the same lie, rebuilding something honest from the pieces left behind. It's been a year since the day I found out who I really am. A year since the cameras captured my parents in handcuffs, since the courtroom echo of guilty carved the last scar into my old life. But standing in my workshop now, surrounded by sunlight and sawdust, it almost feels like I've lived a dozen lifetimes since then. The shop smells the same, a mix of varnish, oak, and the faint citrus of wood oil. The sound of my tools hums like a familiar song. But there's peace here now. A kind that didn't exist when I was still trying to prove something to a man who never wanted to see me. When I first moved to Portland, I didn't know if I'd ever find a sense of belonging again. Everything felt strange, even my name. For months, I couldn't decide whether I was Evan Maddox or Jacob Hale. The world wanted me to pick one. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't have to choose. Both names told the story of who I am. One belonged to the lie that raised me. The other to the truth that saved me. The workshop sits just outside the city, a big red brick space that used to be an old carriage house. Victor helped me buy it, but he didn't put his name on it. He said it was important that this was mine. I called it Second Grain Studio. It started as just a restoration shop, but it's become something more. A space for young craftspeople, kids from foster care programs, teens who grew up without much family, to learn how to work with their hands. They come here after school, sanding, staining, fixing what's broken. And sometimes, without even realizing it, they start fixing themselves too. Every time I watch them transform an old chair into something beautiful again, I see the metaphor, the quiet truth that's shaped my entire life. Broken doesn't mean ruined. It means waiting for a second chance. Some nights, after everyone leaves, I sit on the stool near the window and think about all the people who built the story of me, the ones who lied, the ones who loved, and the ones who lost. Elaine Maddox passed away 3 months after her sentencing began. A heart attack, they said. Peaceful. Quick. The prison chaplain sent me a letter she'd written before she died. I didn't open it right away. When I finally did, it was short, just one line. I never deserved to be your mother, but you'll always be my son. I cried harder for her than I ever expected to. Because for all the lies, for all the wrong, some part of her had truly loved me. I keep that letter in a small wooden box, one I built myself, right beside the photo of Eleanor Hale, the woman I never got to know but somehow feel every day in the mirror. And then there's Victor. He's not just my father now. He's become my compass. He visits the shop every week, always with a cup of coffee and a new story about the company he built. But what I love most is when he talks about her, about Eleanor, the way his voice softens when he says her name. Sometimes we sit in silence, sanding different pieces of wood, the sound of grit and movement filling the space between us. There's no need to talk. We both understand what's been lost, and what's been found. Last month, I finished my most important project yet, a rocking chair I started the night my father slapped me in Austin. The same unfinished piece that sat in my workshop through every storm that followed. I sanded it one last time, polished the curves, and placed it in Victor's living room beside the window that looks out over the Portland skyline. He sits in it every evening, rocking slowly, reading, sometimes just staring out at the city as the sunset spills through the glass. Next to it sits another piece, the oak desk I'd restored for Charles Maddox. When the Maddox estate went up for auction, Victor bought it quietly and had it shipped here. He told me, "It belongs to you, son. You brought it back to life once. Now it can stand for something honest." Every time I look at that desk, I remember the slap, the shame, the silence, and then I remember what came after. Truth. Freedom. Peace. The foundation Victor and I built, the Eleanor and Elaine Fund, provides scholarships for children of adoption and foster care. It's named for both women, one who lost her son, and one who stole him, but both of whom shaped him. At first, it felt strange to honor Elaine that way. But Victor said something that stuck with me. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. And he was right. Because the older I get, the more I realize that love, even when twisted or flawed, still leaves fingerprints that time can't wash away. Last week, Mrs. Adeline Carter, the woman who unknowingly set this truth in motion, visited the shop. She's 79 now, still sharp as ever. She walked around the studio slowly, her hand brushing over each finished piece like she was blessing them. "You've done good, boy," she said with a smile. "Your mother would be proud. Both of them." That night, after she left, I stood by the window as the rain began to fall. I looked down at the bracelet on my wrist, the same one I've worn since I was a baby, and felt a strange comfort. For years, it was just jewelry. Now, it's a symbol, not of loss, but of survival. A reminder that even when we're stolen, even when life rewrites our name, some part of us still knows where we belong. If you asked me who I am today, I'd say this. I'm Evan Maddox. I'm Jacob Hale. I'm the son of a lie, the child of a truth, and the man both made me become. And when I open my shop every morning, the smell of sawdust still greets me like an old friend. Because for all the pieces I've restored in my life, the wood, the furniture, the past, the one thing I've finally managed to restore is myself.